This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online. This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video, March 27th.
Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon. We have on the line the esteemed guest, the great author and brilliant man, Mr. Michael Broers. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, John. How's yourself?
Very well. Thank you for joining us again. For those of you who don't know Michael, brilliant mind, lives in Oxford, used to teach at Oxford, and has many books on the Napoleonic era, which I highly, highly recommend. You can find them on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. And yeah, we're honored to have him once again. And today we're going to talk about not so much a person, but more of a unit, Michael. We're going to talk about Napoleon's Imperial Guard, and they usually rank in the top 5 of most feared formations in military history. As David Chandler says, quote, one of the most celebrated military formations in history, end quote. What do you think makes the Imperial Guards have this mystique?
Well, it was built to have a mystique, really. As the Guard took shape, it becomes very much a part of that. It becomes really the core of Napoleonic warfare in people's minds and in the army's mind. It's meant to be an elite unit. It's conceived of that from the start. We can talk more about that later. It's always present at the great battles, although, as again we can talk about in a minute, it doesn't fight that much, actually. I mean, this is one of the great paradoxes. How often does the Guard see action? But because one of the things that makes it unique, that really does interest me when you look at it by comparison, there have been elite Guard units in every European army of the era, just about. I mean, that's just the way it is. So there's nothing unique about the Guard's role in battle. There's nothing unique in it as a unit at all. What is unique about it is the way it was selected. It's not an elite unit in the sense of you can't have an elite unit like that out of a revolutionary Republican background, as you do with the British Brigade of Guards, as you do the Russian Imperial Guard, which is the formation in many ways it's closest to in some ways. Because you're not drawing on tradition. You're drawing purely on merit. These guys have always seen service before they became guardsmen. You have to do something to become a guardsman. We can go into what. And that gives them an aura before they even start. But the other thing about the Guard, if you think about it, the Guard in combat, when it does fight, is they do have this unshakable discipline.
Yeah.
The heavy infantry is really the acme of the Guard. In the popular mind, to the enemy, these guys don't flinch.
Right. And,
they keep coming.
And I think that's a great point. Other royal guards they're usually sons of aristocracy, or they bought their positions, or they knew someone high up in the government and they became the royal guard. These guys are just soldiers, right, that Napoleon's handpicking. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things I've come across in all my reading and stuff like that is when Napoleon and Alexander meet at Tilsit, they review each other's guards. And Alexander writes back to his sister. He said, this is something that shook me. He said, and Napoleon is perfectly upfront about it. I don't think he means to intimidate the guy. Right. But they review the various troops. And Napoleon said, you see them? Every single one of them is here because of me and is loyal to me. Right. Because they were soldiers. But they distinguish themselves, and that's why they become guards and they're privileged. That's why. They're mine and mine alone.
Yeah.
And Alexander writes back and says, my palace guards, my Imperial Guard are great soldiers, but I inherited them. It passes from father to son. The officer corps is just as you say, they're nobles, inherited, but the guardsmen too.
Mm-hmm.
And the guardsmen, therefore, get in through the patronage of the officers and things like that. Those guys killed my father. Those guys could kill me. That's the difference between his guard and mine. And I don't like it. But he can't trust his guard. Napoleon's guard owe everything to him.
Right.
Right. And that's a huge difference between the Imperial Guard and every other elite unit in Europe.
Yeah. I remember at Tilsit, Alexander was reviewing them, and I think he asked Marshal Ney, like, where are the guys they gave them? They all had scars on their face, like horrible scars, and they said they're all dead, sire. So these are bad hombres. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's talk about the history of the Guard. It originally just started out as a bodyguard formation of elite troops after a close call during the Italian campaigns of 1796 and 97, where Napoleon was almost captured by Austrian hussars. But as you mentioned before, the Bourbon kings famously had the Swiss Guards protecting them. Roman emperors had Praetorians. So this idea isn't a novel idea of having a guard.
Oh, no, having a guard, it's the most normal thing in the world. Whether you're an individual military commander, as Napoleon was at the time, you will always have trusted units who guard you and your headquarters. And people still do. Within military formations, you will still have that today. Again, though, it's the nature of the beast. The Swiss Guards, foreign mercenaries, Swiss regiment, the Irish regiment, Flanders regiment, mostly foreign or foreign background. The British Regiment of Guards isn't that different. And loyal to their commanders as much as to the monarch, whatever. These guys are, because there was no such thing as a concept of elite units for the French Revolutionary armies. It was anathema. But once in the field, the commanders just did this because it's what you do.
Right.
The other thing about the Guard that is not in the least unique is that it is used as a strategic reserve. The military mind of that period, all of them, doesn't matter who you are. You think in terms of having the strategic reserve. They're either firefighters at points at the front where things are looking pretty bad, so you throw in your elite troops, or you simply, if you can help it, don't use them, and then maybe you throw them in at the end. They're what we would call, in rugby, they're the impact players.
Right.
They're the guys who you throw on in the fourth quarter.
Right.
Fresh legs. And often you're veterans. Guys coming towards the end of their career.
Yeah. In Austerlitz, I think the Russian Royal Guard was thrown in trying to capture the Pratzen Heights back. And, at the last second, like you said, but it didn't work out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Alexander uses them the same way.
Right. Well, the Guard was officially created in November 1799 as the Counselor Guard, protecting Napoleon and the other councils. Do you think he intended it to become his own personal tactical reserve, or was it more of a hedge against any other sections of the army overthrowing him? And I'm thinking General Moreau and General Bernadotte, who had some loyal factions within the French army.
Both.
Okay.
I'll take the second bit first, the threat to him. He is deeply aware at Brumaire of two things. Part of the reason that they thought this mightn't be a bad idea to use him. They went to Moreau first, and when Moreau says, no, you go to Bonaparte. Obviously, because he's politically reliable. He's a left-leaning general, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, Napoleon is the only major commander who does not have an army at his command. He misplaced it in Egypt, remember?
Yep. Misplaced it.
He misplaced it. That's what he would say. He misplaced it. Yes, that army, yes. But he doesn't have an army at his back the way the others do. And what does he have to do to get Premier? He has to get Lefebvre on side. He has to get the Commandant of Paris on side. He has to get the Directorial Guard, who are the forerunners of the Consular Guard. They're the guys who are there to guard the Directory, to guard the assemblies. Has to get them all on side, keep his fingers crossed that people back him, and they do. And he's aware of his weakness. So, obviously he goes back on the Second Italian campaign. He starts to build it up. But the real crunch comes at the Channel ports when he's got the chance to build the Guard up into a major unit, and he does. And it's to serve two purposes, usually simultaneously. First of all, this is where we come back to the notion of a Praetorian Guard, a Roman institution. No, once he gets a grip on things in government, right? No military unit apart from the Guard is allowed into Paris. As he looks at what happened in the Directory, he was part of it.
Yep.
Revered, well, nobody's doing that to me.
Right.
No military units are allowed inside Paris without his specific permission. None of them are ever there until 1814, until things are desperate.
Right.
The Guard alone is armed and in the capital, apart from a few, National Guard units. The Guard alone guards the government buildings, guards the royal family. It protects the government, the capital. It's also got to serve the role of the strategic reserve. So, as it were, the closer you are to retirement, in a sense, the more going you are, they can be left to guard Paris.
Right.
That's kind of how it works. It doesn't really work like that in practice, but in theory, that's how it works. The other thing is this. People talk too loosely about who commanded the Guard. Only Napoleon commanded the Guard. All the other marshals commanded sections of the Guard. Nobody had overall command of the Guard except the Emperor himself.
Correct.
Nobody.
Yeah. I saw a note to Berthier that, or maybe it was Joseph, never allow any one commander to control the whole Guard. You have to break, kind of like divide and conquer. Like Davout can do the infantry, Bessier can do the cavalry.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, in the Channel ports, for example, when he's really building up the Guard, Bessier's cavalry, Mont is artillery, passes that over to Mortier at a certain point, and the infantry comes under Lefebvre, I think, at first. And then I can't quite remember. And, so it goes.
Yeah.
But nobody is ever allowed to take complete control of the whole Guard, ever.
Well, in 1804, the Guard changes its name to the Imperial Guard after Napoleon becomes emperor. And at the time, the Guard numbers about 8,000 troops. It eventually gets up to 112,000 in the later Empire years. But let's talk about the requirements of being the Guard. I've seen different things about height requirements. I've seen different things about how many campaigns they had to have. Do you know kind of the rough requirements to be in the Guard?
Yeah. The height requirements work out about 5'10".
Yeah.
Which is pretty tall for the time. Between 5'9" and 5'10", which for the time, you got to remember, is pretty tall. It's 6 foot plus is pretty rare.
And the bearskin hat was another foot, right? So they look even taller. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You had to have 3 years service, at least minimum. Sometimes it was sometimes 5 years service. Originally 5 years, and then it gets lowered to 3. Can't quite remember when. Or this is the key, but preferably 3 campaigns service behind you. You had to have a clean record. In theory, you had to be literate, but most of them that didn't really matter. And they were the exact same requirements as the gendarmerie, which was the other great elite unit of the Napoleonic army. To be a gendarme or a guardsman, you had to have the same qualifications. So it did make them from the start an elite unit. Now look, after about 1812, and even when we're, even sometimes by the time of the Spanish campaigns, but certainly by 1812, after 1812, this goes out the window. But they're still looking for elite soldiers.
Yeah.
You still they will take, even by 1814, they're taking promising conscripts, but you still had to prove something. But at its peak, it was for the time an incredibly elite unit.
Yeah, and let's talk about the benefits. I know the Guard earned more money, had better quarters, better equipment than the regular line regiments of the army, and when we're taken to the battlefield in horse-drawn carts, meaning they didn't have to walk. Other French soldiers called them the immortals. There's even a joke that their donkeys were promoted to mules.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, that the Guard inspired the regular army, or do you think there was envy and hatred towards the Guard? Because they were, like you said, they were often left out of the battle. They were kept in reserve. So do you think, did it give them something to yearn for the regular army, or did they despise these guys?
Oh, they didn't despise the Guard, but it was a love-hate relationship. But if you think about it, it's great man management, and it's typical, of managing a workforce well. Everybody resents the Guard and is envious of the Guard. They're more money than us. They're better dressed than us. They don't even have to march.
Right.
Because they were sort of beautiful white oxen that took the guard around. It gets exacerbated when it becomes the Imperial Guard. Because what the army sees is for the Imperial coronation, the Guard get these splendid uniforms, they get new boots, they get everything. What they didn't see was after the coronation, they were ready to give them all back. They were purely for the occasion.
Yeah.
But they get them out again when they go on campaign. But they were given all these things and more money. There were all sorts of other things that went with being a guardsman too. Napoleon called them his children, and he made sure, as far as was possible, that their wives and children were looked after.
Mm-hmm.
The widows and orphans of the Guard were to be looked after. He always tried to make sure that, even though the Code Napoleon outlawed dowries, unofficially they continued. And he always tried to make sure that the daughters of the guardsmen had dowries to get married with, because he knows how he and his brothers had to struggle to find his sister's dowries on a soldier's family. And he did. He did his. Yeah. They are my children. They are their orphans are my children forever. There was this deep feeling. He did what he could for the army generally, but the Guard especially got all that. And again, no one ever disputed the fact that the guardsmen were brave. No one ever complained about them being kept out of battle and anything, because they were the strategic reserve, and they knew that was. Everybody knew that was war. No one ever called them cowards or anything like that. But there was resentment at all this, and the line regiments didn't have it, and yet everybody wanted to be a guardsman.
Right.
And it was something that everybody could aspire to, because the other thing was, you were, even though your pay might double, most people were taking a demotion to become guardsmen technically.
Yeah.
A corporal sergeant in a line regiment would go in as a guardsman and have to work his way up again.
I kind of equate it to being like the star quarterback, and you're like on a football team, and you're like an offensive lineman doing the same thing. You're on the same field doing all the same work, but you're not getting the same attention as the star quarterback.
It's a bit like that. Although the difference is that, if you're a linebacker, or for that matter, if you're a guard or a tackler or something like that, that's because of the position you play, and you're never going to be a quarterback.
That's true.
Whereas the difference with the Guard is, we can, if we're good soldiers, we can aspire to the Guard. And I think there's a lot of statistical work been done and recent work in French that I haven't been able to get hold of. It's not arrived yet. Only found out about it a couple of weeks ago on the Guard, that said, a lot of guys, because of the huge casualties later in the war, a lot of guys did have their dream come true in the worst possible circumstances. So you're a guardsman. The best way to become a guardsman after 1812 would to have been in Spain. A terrible way to become one, but you do. Most people who deserved to be promoted were promoted because of death, because of casualties, or retirement. That was something that everybody did hate the Guard, but everybody wanted to be one. It was a brilliant piece of management. It was a different kind of the rivalries he set up between infantry, cavalry, artillery. But nobody wanted to change the arm of in.
Yeah.
They just hated them. But it would show with Napoleon. Come on, who wants to be an infantryman? Who wants to be a cavalryman? They're all a bunch of, they're all just a bunch of preppies in the cavalry.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, though. Let's say, you get promoted, but it's like a blessing and a curse to be a guardsman, because discipline was very high. It's forbidden to brawl or get drunk. There's got to be drawbacks, right? Because I know the old guard referred to the grognards or the grumblers.
The grognards, yeah.
Because you're a soldier, but you're basically in reserve, and even though you're seeing your comrades fighting, you're not allowed to go out there until Napoleon releases you from the harness or the leash. So it must have been great to be hauled around in ox carts, but then you're not allowed to fight. So if you're a fighter and that's all you want to do, to be in the guards and you're in the back, it must have been a tough thing.
Not to a great extent, I don't think. everybody realizes what the strategic reserve is. When you're in it, you're in it. These guys aren't rookies. Not until we're getting towards the very end. They know what battle is. They're not these young, keen kids wanting to get out of the blocks. That doesn't mean they're cowards.
Right.
But it means that, there's sense to what we're doing. We have absolute sense in what the boss says. And if we're needed, we're there. But you don't go looking for trouble because trouble will find you. I think the only times you get this are fairly early on. I mean, at Austerlitz, there are rumblings. Well, the Russian Imperial Guard get to fight. Why do we get to fight? But it depends because, say, the Guard cavalry fought at Austerlitz.
Yeah.
Bessières leads a very important countercharge against the Russian Imperial Guard cavalry that really does hold up that left flank at a crucial time, that protects Lannes at a very crucial time when he's going up to help Soult. It depends. And there are units of the Guard, like the artillery, nearly always see service as far as I can tell. But yeah, the core of the Guard infantry, the heavy infantry, that's what they're there for. They're there to be held back. And every elite unit in Europe has that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look at Waterloo, Wellington has to use his strategic reserve pretty early. But even so, they know he has no problem with discipline in the Brigade of Guards. Because they know that's what they're for, the same as Napoleon's do. And the whole army knows that.
That's a good point.
The worrying thing, this is where it becomes a double-edged sword when you read people's memoirs and stuff like that, is when the Guard is used. That it can run through the army, the Guard's on the move. And you can read it two ways. It depends on your experience as a soldier, what you've been through that day even. The Guard's being mobilized. Oh my God, we're all going to die. Is it that bad? And then on the other hand, the Guard's being mobilized. That'll give them a fright. They'll run when they see this coming. And it's the same on the other side. Again, I mean, the classic example is if you look at Waterloo. Here comes the Guard. Oh my God, the Guard. My God, I've never seen. Because a lot of these guys, I've never seen the Guard before. Oh my God. On the one hand, say the Prussians who've seen the Guard plenty of times, it's oh my God. We can't stop them. We never have. Yeah. But say if you look at the British, well, the Anglo-Dutch, they've maybe never seen the Guard in action before. Oh my God, I've heard all about them. Whereas, say, you get the commanders, not just Wellington, but a lot of the others. Come on, boys, he's thrown in the Guard. That means we've got him on the ropes. That's the absolute throw of the. That's the absolute last card he's got to play. Yeah, well, it's the Ace of Spades. No, it's not the Ace of Spades. It's his last card. We've got him. I tell you, all we've got to do is hold on. We see them off, boys, and we won. It's that kind of mixed reaction.
It's a great point. That's a great point, because I was reading Marbeau's memoirs, and he said when the Old Guard was released on the Austrians and Prussians, it was like we were holding the head of Medusa, and they were just frightened out of their minds. Yeah. But as you point out, at Waterloo, maybe Wellington's thinking, all right, this is his last roll of the dice. He's got nothing left. So if we beat these guys, we've won. Yeah. And if you look too, I mean, it's not always successful. But again, I mean, if you think about Leipzig, some of the more experienced Russian commanders saying, look, this is the last roll of the dice, guys. Yeah. Come on, we've seen this before. Come on now. If you preempt a bit, say, he should have done that at Borodino. Right. And he didn't. Right. And we'll come back to that. And he didn't, but he's done it now. Why is he doing it now? Because we've got him. Come on. That's right. We will come back to that. I do want to talk about the shape of the Guard a little bit more. It was a lot of parts to it. It had a Marine battalion of sailors. It had a battalion of sappers, plus full regiments of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And there's three sections of the Guard: the old, middle, and young. Could you kind of tell us what the differences were? Old, middle, and young it's sort of almost purely by age and length of service. Right. The grognards are the guys who've been there the longest. They've been there, the ones who've been there the longest. And say after the regrouping that goes on, after a lot of campaigns, guys who were maybe young Guard will move up to be grognards because of losses and whatever. The young Guard are basically the newer recruits to the Guard, and the young Guard grows in numbers and its importance really towards the end, because these are guys really, a lot of the young Guard, it's almost a sign of weakness in some ways. These are guys maybe who don't have the three campaigns behind them,
but have shown a lot of promise, and they're there to beef it up. I mean, as I said before, even after 1812, a lot of them are conscripts coming out of the depots who've shown a lot of promise. And they've been taken and they've been trained. And so they're, they are they're conceived as the reserve of the reserve.
Right.
That they will be brought into the Guard in time. The Middle Guard, now I confess I've never quite got a hold of that. I've seen the term used a lot by historians. I've never seen it used that much in contemporary literature. But most of the Middle Guard, as far as I can tell, it seems to be talked about a lot more from about 1011 onwards. They tend to be people from the Young Guard or recruits to the Guard who maybe haven't quite made the 3 billets, who have mostly come out of Spain. Although the first time I really hear it referred to by military historians from the archival stuff, but not in their own terminology, really comes after Eylau. They are the guys who are brought in, maybe from the Young Guard or promoted from the reserves to being brought in to fill up the ranks and bring themselves right up to speed. And they're the ones who are billeted largely in Germany to be trained by the Old Guard, and then are sent to Spain. And it's in the Middle Guard, it's in Spain that the Middle Guard really emerges.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Yeah, and it's always a mystery or a debate among historians, like, well, who are the Guard regiments that broke at Waterloo? And usually it's referred to as the Middle Guard, but they never really, there's a lot of debate on which ones broke, and there was the Old Guard squares that held up the rear guard of the army. It's just interesting to me. There's 3 different levels, and as you say, there's kind of some mystery on which group was in which group.
Yeah, I mean, it can get amorphous, especially after Russia, because there's a lot of reshaping goes on. People being pulled out of Spain who might be Young Guard or regarded as Middle Guard, moved up because they've done their campaigns. They're veterans. They're obviously good soldiers and that kind of thing. The process, I think, begins a bit after Eylau, because those are the first really massive losses he's got to make good.
Well, the other misnomer is that people think it's just French homogeneous unit. It's not, right? What other countries are involved in the Guard?
Well, the Guard is overwhelmingly French.
Sure.
I think you have to be clear about that. The Guard is an overwhelmingly French thing. Pretty much from 1807, the French army hadn't had Lancer units much to speak of before they come into Poland. They've had Polish troops in the army. They had plenty of Polish soldiers in the army. But it's then, and especially when they acquire access to what had been the stud farms of Poland, of Prussian Poland, and indeed when they get help from Saxony, very loyal ally. Saxon stud farms are very important. They start to develop the cavalry a lot more. And the Guard-like cavalry, particularly the Lancers, to begin with, tend to be Polish. And they're brought into the Guard. But you've also got to be careful when you hear about Italian guardsmen, Polish guardsmen. These are Guard units within their own national armies. Who are attached to the Guard.
Right, Dutch Imperial Guard.
Yeah. And when you hear about Italian guardsmen, German guardsmen, these are guys who belong to the annexed departments. 1/3 of Italy was annexed directly to France at the height of the Empire. These are guys who were the longer-term annexations, places like Piedmont, the main source in many ways, where I did my thesis on that. These were guys who were part of the French army. They might have been in Piedmontese regiments, or Italian regiments, but these were guys who were part of the French army, but they are Italians, but they're French soldiers and they're French guardsmen, the same with a lot of the Germans, guys from the Rhineland. They are French citizens. They're part of the empire. But they do, it is a mixture of several nationalities. And you do get Poles who've served in the Italian and the French army a long time who become guards,
Yeah, it's just interesting. You have Mamluks in the Imperial Guard. You have Polish Lancers, and we'll get to them in some Sarah in a minute. Well, the Guard had some famous commanders. Obviously, we talked about Bessier. You had Marshal Lannes, who famously overspent 300,000 francs on the Guard budget, which I was reading how much the kit is for the Guard. Like, even back then, francs-wise, it was a lot of money to outfit these guys. Yeah.
They were an expensive unit.
Yeah.
Of course, but after Russia, a lot of this goes out the window.
Right.
Right. And when you're on campaign, I mean, their boots rotted and fell off them like everybody else.
Right.
Their uniforms were, everybody was a tattered mess by the time a campaign was well underway, the Guard included.
Yeah.
It was hard to keep them resupplied.
Yeah. Yeah, with beautiful parade ground outfits all the time. Yeah, that must be hard.
I mean, Austerlitz, part of the desperation that leads not to Austerlitz itself, but to to some of the other engagements, to Ulm and that sort of thing. Our boots are wearing out.
Yeah.
There's a bit like Gettysburg. Well, there's a depot there. Take it. Yeah. All right, we will, and then it escalates. But they had to do it because they were falling to pieces. Look, we've got to get some decent overcoats. Winter's coming in here. We're in the middle of the Alps. You know that. Okay, let's get them. But when they come back for the big victory parade after Austerlitz, after the 1805 campaign, they get kitted out again.
Yeah.
That's the thing about being in the Guard. They will get kitted out again, and this time you won't take it away from them. But if you look at, say, the other end of the spectrum, by the time you get to Waterloo, it's very interesting, actually, when because I was involved with Ridley Scott's Napoleon as an advisor. And somebody did raise a very good point. It was actually one of the actors. But, like Waterloo, it was fought in the summer. Why have you got guys wearing greatcoats in the middle of the summer? So by the time you get to Waterloo, I said, and it's the same in a lot of these campaigns. I said, you'll find it in the 1813 campaign too, that these guys' uniforms were in shreds. They were mostly, a lot of them were just wearing their long johns. So they put their greatcoats over them because that's all they had. And there weren't by that stage, there wasn't the facility to kit them out properly. And that's the way they went around.
Yeah, but for film, they got to have everyone kitted out for the movie to make everyone look glamorous, I suppose. Yeah, point. Well, let's jump into the Guard's fighting history now in battles. Obviously, the first campaign was Marengo in 1800, where Napoleon had to throw a couple hundred of his own personal bodyguard to stall the Austrians until General Desai returned to save the day. But that was rare, right? For the most part, we talked earlier, the Guard stood in place as a tactical reserve only to be used in emergencies or at the end of a battle.
That's right. There will always be a contingent of the old Guard guarding Imperial headquarters. There'll always be somebody there. But they're not the main force. They're just some guys he's detached to do that duty. And it's always the guardsmen he detaches. But mainly they are that strategic reserve. They're not sufficiently huge until after the Channel camps, until 1805, until the Austerlitz campaign, to be the real hammer blow that they will become from then on. And from then on, as we've discussed before, that's what they are. They are the strategic reserve to be used as firefighters or to be used as the hammer blow at the end, or as say was the case at Waterloo and again at Leipzig to really hold the door to let Napoleon get away. And its role in battle is also, as we kind of touched on earlier, it's also the threat that, look, those guys are out there. He'll take that arm out from behind his back and he'll wallop us with it.
Right.
He'll wallop us with it. You see this, the sport I love most is rugby. And you see this a lot in rugby. As I say, you get to the last quarter and suddenly they'll bring in, these are guys who maybe are the veterans. They probably couldn't play the full game. It's 80 minutes in rugby. They probably couldn't play the full 80 minutes. But boy, they can play the last 20, maybe the last 15. And these are strong men, experienced players, veterans, scars all over them. And they've only got to do it for 10 or 15 minutes. And you could just see the other team, we give up. You know,
Using that analogy, if I'm a Prussian or Austrian sergeant, I've been fighting for 8 hours against
hmm
the line regiments, and then I see this glorious new outfit coming at me, I'd be like, oh my God, these guys? Yeah, that it'd be very demoralizing.
and it is the way they come forward, and everybody talks about that. They march forward at a steady pace. The guard doesn't charge. This
Yep.
is even more intimidating than the French bayonet charge. I mean, Napoleon's built on that tradition with the French. You know, they're lousy marksmen. We've got lousy guns. The bayonet charge will frighten the hell out of everyone. But
Yep.
not the guard. I mean, they march with fixed bayonets, one thing or another. But they march slow, steady pace to the same drum beat, and they don't flinch. They are incredibly well drilled.
Yeah.
In that sense,
yeah.
they're like the Persian immortals. They
Yeah.
just don't flinch. You know, so it's sort of why you see at Waterloo, all right, they're going to be the Persians, we're going to be the Spartans. Everybody get behind your shield, and nobody moves. Nobody leaves this square. Nobody breaks the square. You know, whereas the guard just keeps coming. They
Right.
don't stop. Whereas, say, when the word gets out at Waterloo, when the Prussians show up and Napoleon says, right, fall back, the guard's retreating. It's over, because for the rest of the army, whether it's, you know, tactically right or wrong, the panic spreads through the line regiments, the guard's retreating.
Right.
But the thing is that, you know, the guard doesn't retreat.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because in 15 years, the rest of the army sees it and they're like, wow, we've never seen that before. So that
That's
caused
right.
a panic. Yeah,
Well, if
that's a
you
great point.
think about it, the Grenadier Guards, which actually in the British Army, it's the senior guard regiment in the British Army. The traditional title is the First Regiment of Foot, because that's what they were. They were the first infantry regiment, the first regiment of foot. They gained the title the Grenadier Guards at Waterloo because they saw off the Imperial Guard, who they reckoned were grenadiers. So they take that title. They're given that title. You are now,
Right.
because why? Because you beat the Imperial Guard's grenadiers.
Yep.
And that's what matters. And that's the Guard's reputation. That's what the Guard means. But it's the way they come at you, as you were saying, John, you know, the big bearskin hats,
Yep.
the fixed bayonets. And it's like the Mummy or Frankenstein's monster. They don't run, they don't hurry, they don't turn into bats. They just keep coming. Yeah.
Well, that's very scary to me. In 1807 at Eylau, the Imperial Guard are actually involved in the battle, and they withstood heavy artillery fire as Napoleon was down to his last reserves. And I heard it stated before that the Guard wasn't actually very good at guarding the Emperor because he was almost captured a few times, but they're really good at fighting battles. Does it sound accurate?
I'm not sure about that in some ways. There were certainly a few times, yeah. One of the real fights was actually, one of the biggest fights was at Friedland, when the Cossacks got through.
Yeah.
And Napoleon himself had to kind of organize the Mamelukes, the Chasseurs de la Garde is his favorite regiment, the light cavalry of the Guard, get them together. And even he got sort of, you know, some of the kitchen staff.
Mm-hmm.
You said, come on, I remember you were at Austerlitz, come on. And what scared the Russians there was suddenly here was this fat little guy on the white horse, and oh my God, it is him, and he's coming right for us. And he does that again during the retreat from Moscow a couple of times, because he has to. And I think these are the things that go down in the memory as well. They weren't too good at guarding Napoleon. Most of the time, they didn't have to worry too much. If you look at, it was really the Mamelukes who were there to guard his person. You know, they were the Secret Service. They were they were the inner corps, and the Chasseurs de la Garde, the light guard-like cavalry. There would be a few detachments of them. It's usually when you see Napoleon painted in his green uniform, it's their uniform he's wearing because they were his favorite regiment. And it's them. And the Guard was really there in a much wider sense of protection than his person. But if you look what they did so many times during the Russian campaign, at the Berezina, at Leipzig, above all at Waterloo, you really see them protecting the back of the army.
Yeah.
Napoleon himself, but also the army.
Well, and Napoleon wasn't like a stationary commander. He would gallop around the battlefield a lot, so I'm sure that's hard to guard somebody who's running from corps to corps issuing orders.
And they weren't meant to. They were meant to guard headquarters.
Right. Well, you mentioned Russia earlier, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask. In 1812, you know, the invasion of Russia decimates the Guard units as it did the rest of the army. But Napoleon has been criticized by historians for not releasing the Guard during the final stages of the Battle of Borodino to deliver the finishing blow to the Russian army. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I've listened to various people on this and, trying to make up my own mind too. I think there are two views of it that aren't antithetical to each other, but you've got to bring up. And in the end, okay, let's start with this. You've just said quite rightly that as often as not, Napoleon is a commander who's out and about the field. He can see where troubles come, or if he hears that trouble's coming, he'll go there. Now, Borodino, he did not. Borodino, I remember talking to Charles Esdale not long ago about this, and he said it was a bad day at the office for Napoleon Borodino. And I said, well, he was lucky because it was even a worse day for Kutuzov. Napoleon took up an elevated position where he really thought he could see the action properly, and he couldn't. And very un-Napoleonic, he didn't budge. He didn't leave, so he didn't know. And when particularly Ney comes running back to him and says, look, release the reserve, send in the replacements. We've got them. Right. We've got them by the neck. All we have to do is push that bit harder. Well, first of all, Ney's not built up the most reliable reputation with Napoleon.
True.
Maybe not. And it's sort of, I can't see anything going on over there. Well, of course you can't. Something similar is happening over on his left, where Eugene is actually doing quite well bottling up Bartley's fallback position. No. He's obsessed with taking the high ground in the middle and made a mess of it. That's often the case in these battles. He allows the same. But I have to agree with Charles. It was bad generalship that he wasn't out and about the field. He thought he knew from where he was positioned, but he didn't. Now, I think it's reasonably clear that he was ill, but he should have known that. And therefore, one of his great attributes as a commander was his ability to delegate and to trust his subordinates. Very like Nelson. I trust you guys to do your job.
Right.
And he was beginning to lose faith with people by the time he got to Borodino. There've been all sorts of things going on, the things that really shouldn't have been happening at that level, and people who shouldn't have done it. Davout and Murat had a stand-up row after Smolensk, and he would not intervene. He wasn't even listening to Davout. Never mind to Murat and Ney, who he thought, look, these guys are nuts. But all that's going on. At that level, I think at that strategic level, I think Charles is absolutely right. He made a mess of it, but it is what it is, and you are where you are.
Yeah.
At a deeper level, he thought, we have taken a lot of losses. This is a bad one. And I don't know how many men they've really lost. And they have a nasty habit of producing an army when I don't think they've got one. Now, look, we have got to take Moscow, or we're all going to die. We're all going to starve, and we don't know what's waiting for us. I have got to keep the Guard intact, because if we have to fight again in the next 2 or 3 weeks, never mind 2 or 3 days, that's all I'm going to have.
Yeah.
That is a complete fighting unit. I can't use it. Who's to say they're right? And, and again, they'll throw it back at them. You could always be honest with Napoleon. Look, mate, if you'd got out around the field, you would have seen what we were telling you. And Ney more or less says to him, if you don't believe me, believe Davout, but you won't believe him either.
Right. Jerome, Junot, who let him down at Smolensk, as you mentioned, Murat and Davout are fighting with each other. So maybe, by the time he gets to Borodino, he's like, I'm not listening to my subordinates. What do they know? They're screwing up left and right.
There were people like Eugene and Davout who he should have listened to. He should have listened to Ney. And he should have listened to Murat, but he's inclined not to trust them. But at least I would always say in that sense, Charles is right. He had a bad day at the office.
He did.
Kutuzov didn't even go to the office. He stayed in his tent, issuing orders. He didn't show his face.
Well, it turns out that these guardsmen were later used during the retreat to plow through the Russians' army at the Battle of Krasnoy. And there's a great quote that I want to read from Davidov, a Russian commander. If you want to grab a sip of water right now, it would be a good time. But quote, After midday, we sighted the old guard with Napoleon riding in their midst. The enemy troops, sighting our unruly force, got their muskets at the ready and proudly continued on their way without hurrying their step. Like blocks of granite, they remained invulnerable. I shall never forget the unhurried step and the awesome resolution of these soldiers, for whom the threat of death was a daily and familiar experience. With their tall, bearskin caps, blue uniforms, white belts, red plumes, and epaulets, they looked like poppies on the snow-covered battlefield, column after column, dispersing us with musket fire and ridiculing our useless display of chivalry. The Imperial Guard plowed through our Cossacks like a 100-gun ship through fishing skiffs, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Does that pretty much sum up the discipline of the Guard?
Very much. It is this unshakability. That you'll find that reflected in the Russians too. And not just in the Russian Imperial Guard, right throughout the ranks of the Russian army. These guys have nerves of steel. You will find it reflected very much in what emerges from the Wellington's Peninsular Army. It shows itself at Waterloo. You know, the thin red line, you know, less going forward than standing your ground. But the Guard, to the other armies of Europe, particularly in the early campaigns, until the Russians really start to come into it, and until the British army's transformed by the fighting in the peninsula, you don't see anything quite of that magnitude. There are elite units, but this is an elite unit, and as I say, the discipline on the battlefield is rock solid. You know, the quality of the men is unquestionable. It is something their own army aspires to. They don't break, they don't yield, but they keep coming, and they keep coming at that steady pace. They're not ready for this. No one is ready for it for a long time. And it's an aura that never leaves the Guard.
Yeah, I just love that quote. But by the time Napoleon's army reached the Berezina River, the 50,000 guardsmen in Russia had been reduced to 1,100. So he's really got to reconstitute this group pretty fast, correct?
Well, there are, don't forget, that's not the entire Imperial Guard. You know, there are guard units scattered all around the German fortresses and stuff. You know, there are guard units. There's a whole new young guard in the depots being brought up to speed. You know, promising conscripts. Maybe these guys, you get to the point where these guys maybe don't have the 3 years service. You know, they're not NCOs. They don't have all the qualifications they used to, but they're promising recruits. They're there. They're being trained. The almost sort of money tree of the Imperial Army for a long time after Russia is Spain. There's the young guard in Spain, and this is actually when the tide turns against the French in Spain decisively. Is not before Russia. Units are sent. You know, the big reverses come. Not before Russia. Important units are pulled out. There's no doubt about it, and it doesn't help things. It's after Russia when they've got to make those numbers for the Saxon campaign in 1813. That's where the new guardsmen are going to come from. Some are young guard, moved up through middle guard or something, moved up to be the new grognards. Yeah. Some of them are promising conscripts, guys with a very good record in Spain. You don't need 3 campaigns to be a hero in Spain. Spain is every day. Yeah. Like two stretches in Spain, and you're all right. So they're being moved up. You know, they're replenishing the ranks. By 1814, though, they're even just taking promising lads out of the depots for the young guard.
Well, by 1814, it's pretty much too late. Napoleon abdicates and is exiled to Elba. And Chateaubriand notices the guard's appearance when King Louis XVIII returns to the French throne, quote, "I do not believe that human faces have ever worn such threatening expressions. These grenadiers covered with scars, these conquerors of Europe, were forced to salute an old king, a veteran of years, not war. Some drew the corners of their mouths into grimaces of scorn and rage," end quote. And the Guard were disbanded after Napoleon's second abdication. Was it just too dangerous to have these guys around King Louis?
Yes. When you think about some of them, a small number of them, go to Elba with him, come back. And the rest rally to them. You rally to him at the drop of a hat in 100 days.
Sure.
The loyalty that these men showed to what was effectively a lost cause is astounding. Their whole life was bound up with him with them. You know, they were his real family. They were certainly, in their minds, they were his. They turn out for him. I mean, the leave taking at Fontainebleau is legendary, and it's heartfelt on both sides. But I mean, after everything that happened, it had to be disbanded. There's some of them were left as a kind of a gesture.
Yeah.
These guys have shown themselves to be utterly loyal to Napoleon. And you often think about it. I mean, I was thinking about it when I was writing the final stages of my own trilogy about Napoleon. When does the empire end? And I couldn't help think to myself, I mean, because I was brought up steeped in this. My grandmother was French and a great patriot.
Yeah.
And you get this sense that really, when does it end? It ends when the last units of the Guard turn themselves in on the Loire and their colours are turned over and they go home.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a bit like, it's less Appomattox than when Johnson's Army of Tennessee surrender. All right, just go away.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of them, there were investigations. A lot of them are not even demi-sold. A lot even are not even put on half pay.
Right.
You're out.
Yeah.
Or whatever. A lot of them were watched by the police for a long time afterwards, with good reason.
Well, it must have been humbling. We conquered Europe for 15 years, and now this new government and new king tell us to go home.
From what I've been able to read about it, people have done a lot more work on the post-1815 period than me. It wasn't humbling, it was angering. And it's the attitude, from what we've been able to glean, I think, is interesting. It's not one of being humbled or even of being bitter in that sense that we're betrayed. It's like, well, what do you expect from these guys but betrayal? Who are these upstarts? If the British or the Prussians had done it to us, if Blucher or Wellington had done it to us, who are these popinjays who've come back from nowhere?
Right.
And they're now telling us that, you know, that we're nothing. They can do whatever they want to us. And this is the great strength of the Napoleonic legend in its early stages. They can treat us whatever way they like. We are the Guard. They can never take that away from us. They can never take it away. And the other thing, I mean, this is folk legend in many ways, but I know of too many instances in France. It's passed down even now in families where someone was in the Guard, or they knew someone who was in the Guard, or in a village or something. These guys have a Rambo syndrome. They cannot settle back, a lot of them, into normal life. A lot of soldiers can. The recent conscripts do, in many ways. Yeah. They harbor bitterness at being demi-sold and all that. I'm not saying there isn't a vast network of discontented guys out there, but the Guard particularly, the guys with long service, don't forget, they can't settle back into civilian life. And the one family particularly I know, a very distinguished family of wine growers in Burgundy, Chevry-Chambertin, which, by the way, was Napoleon's favorite wine. Two different things about Guardsmen. One who made it and became a wine grower himself in his own right. And he established a statue and a park to Napoleon in his village and has a cuvée Napoleon. I drink at my birthday. But there's another guy who was in this family of wine growers, and he could not settle back. He'd been a Guard. He'd been in the Guard at Jena. And all the way through the Waterloo. One of the last who turned himself in 1815 to MacDonald. It was the marshal, the royalists put in charge of, you know, standing everybody down. They tried setting him up as a postmaster, and it didn't work. You know, and he tried the back in the vineyard, it didn't work. And eventually just became a, you know, hanger-on in the family. I mean, he would sit in the cafe and just say to the younger ones, "Come on, buy me a drink. I'll tell you about Jena. Buy me a drink, and I'll tell you about Dresden." That's the kind of stereotypical thing you hear, you read about in a novel, or you it's passed down to a legend, and you think, yeah. This is within that family.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Yeah.
You know, it was real. You know, they were impressive fellas.
This will be my final question for you, because I want to talk about the legacy of the Guard as an elite, specialized fighting force. Do you see it like today, like in like the Navy SEALs or the British SAS? Like, do you see it at that level, or do you see it as like the last of the Praetorian Guard, and we really don't have anything like that anymore?
I'm no expert on modern warfare, but obviously the whole landscape of warfare has changed. I mean, literally as well as figuratively.
Sure.
Where you can see that the ethos and the esprit de corps lives on is in many ways in the British Brigade Guards. In an army that's been shrunken, that frankly has been denuded of resources, those Guard regiments, particularly the 3 ancient Guards regiments, Grenadiers, the Coldstream, the Scots, they retain that aura, and within themselves that model of those elite units. You think about World War II, the way Stalin revives it, the Guards regiments. And it's not just the Imperial Tsarist Guard he's thinking of. These are not inherited positions. These are not gained through patronage. He recruits the way Napoleon did. Go on out there, you guys. Find me the best veterans. Find me the guys who fought best up to now. And we will turn them into Guards regiments. And we will give them honors. We will give them their battle flags. We will turn them into the elite units. So they become possibly the finest infantry, the finest fighting force of the war. In Europe anyway. There is still the concept of the elite force that the rest of the army is going to hate and envy, but aspire to.
Right.
You know, and
in that regard,
you see,
I see them as you know, Army Rangers or
Yeah.
SEALs or
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, well, say within the American force, say the Marine Corps would be the Guard. You know, the number of people I know who are a little bit older than me, not that much older. When Vietnam was coming up,
Sure.
I'm going to enlist before I'm drafted because I want to be a Marine, because the aura of the Marines is there. You watch a John Wayne movie. John Wayne's always a Marine. And there is that aura, and the Guard is very much part of that. And I think it does a lot to found it. I mean, if you look at the satellite kingdoms, in Naples, in Italy, I'm getting very interested in Murat. In Naples, in the Kingdom of Italy, which is run by Eugene on a day-to-day basis, you know, and even the wonkier places like, you know, Westphalia and Holland, first thing you do within an army is you try and create a Guard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you try and create a Guard, and Napoleon will snatch it away from you, you know, if they're any good. He doesn't do that to Murat. He doesn't do that to Murat, and he doesn't do it to Eugene.
Yeah, but I think he does it to Louis in the Dutch Guard. Yeah.
Yeah, and he does it to Jerome eventually.
Yeah.
You know, okay, you can stump off in 1812. You can stump off back to Westphalia if you want. You go back to Castle. Oh, no, they stay here. It does create an aura, and it's bound up with the Napoleonic legend. I mean, I can, if you indulge me for a minute, there are two things. Let's say when we talk about the Guard as a family, it's not just the Napoleon's the boss and whatever. They're a unit. They're a family. The two things that really strike me: birth of the King of Rome. what is the first thing he does? You know, when his sister and the midwife tell him, yeah, it's okay now, you can pick him up. What does he do? He picks him up and he goes to the balcony. He opens it and he shows Napoleon Charles to the guard. And what struck everybody was the way they just cheered. And they were crying. They were crying and they were cheering. And that discipline had broken down.
Yeah.
You know, insofar as it ever did. You can't take a little kid out there, he'll freeze to death. You bring him back in here. What? Turn him blue. Well, of course he's going to be blue. He's a guardsman. You know, that kind of thing. He's not just my son, he's our son. That's our future, all of us. The other, this really hit home to me because it was in the Russian campaign. And of course, the Russian army, the icons are brought out when they saved Our Lady of Smolensk and carried her, and saved her from the French. That's brought out before Borodino. And about that same time, portrait of the King of Rome that Napoleon had commissioned arrives in camp.
Yep.
And he displays it to the guard, and they treat it almost as an icon. That's the depth of the bond between them. On his birthday, 15th of August, which becomes St. Napoleon's Day, he tries to foster a tradition that veterans, all army veterans, but particularly guard veterans, if they're not married, should marry. And he provides dowries for them. And it happens on his birthday. Why? Because we're family. I can't be there in person, but I can give you dowry. That's the strength of feeling. Can you imagine in 1814 or 1815 when that goes?
Yeah.
How they'll feel for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think you hit upon it. I think that is the legacy. Any unit today that has a strong esprit de corps, like even the French Foreign Legion or the Royal Canadian Mounties or any military organization or police organization, you mentioned the gendarmes before, that have a strong bond, like a family bond. I think that's the legacy of the Imperial Guard. To like you said, does the Guard die? Yeah, I mean, essentially at Waterloo or when they had to turn in their flags after Waterloo. But yeah, what is the legacy? I think it's any unit today that has a strong esprit de corps.
These guys went on having reunions right throughout the Restoration period when it was illegal, but they did, and not just in France. German veterans of the Guard, they were still having their knees up on the 15th of August or the anniversary of Jena or whatever. They were proud to be guardsmen, and that part of Germany had been French since 1797. The Belgian veterans are at it. Yeah. It lives with them. Through them, and it becomes, as I say, a living part of the legend. These guys are the living legend. They're there to bear witness when he's on St. Helena after he's dead. This is what it's like. It's something that struck me. A couple of guys they interviewed for the Ken Burns series on Vietnam, but I've also heard it said by former Marines, a few former Marines I know who served in Vietnam. And even ones who haven't, who were Marines who've been in Iraq, whatever. I have always conducted myself as a Marine. I will always be a Marine. Yeah. And you will hear it from people in the British Army. I am a household cavalryman. I will always be a lifeguard. I will always be a Blues and Royal. Always. It's the same. A really elite unit with a really close bond, especially in the case of the Guard to its commander, has a life that goes beyond the individual and that can stretch from one generation to another.
Yeah, and you mentioned their commander. I think it was at Wagram when Marshal Bessier was injured and the Guard thought he was dead, and they all started crying in the middle of the battle. He wasn't, he was just injured. But it was that bond that, oh my God, our commander was struck down.
And it shows you the kind of people Napoleon did choose to command sections of the Guard. I mean, Bessières was somebody at times when Napoleon wasn't in Paris. He was the one who was entrusted with the personal security of Marie-Louise and the Eaglet. Marmont, Mortier, these are his old pals. They were entrusted with it. I mean, Sultan Davout were highly esteemed men, but they were too valuable where they were. And Davout's, if you think about it, Davout's Third Corps, who in Russia become I Corps, what was the aspiration to bring this corps up to the same level as the Guard. All right, boys, we may not be the Marines, but we're the Rangers. Yeah? That's it. Okay.
And
he
some
did.
opinions he did do that. Yeah, he did.
I think he did.
Yeah.
Well, the Guard's discipline broke down in Moscow. It's so extraordinary that it's actually commented upon. Davout's began to break down too. At an earlier point, once he gets to Moscow, he pulls them together.
Yeah. Well, Michael, that was an incredible summary of the Guard. Thank you for that. Again, Michael Brors, I recommend any of his books on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. And as always, it's a pleasure having him on the show.
My pleasure, John. Anytime. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay.